Soul Grows in Israel, a podcast where we ask the questions about ancient Jewish wisdom, modern life, and everything in between. So let's ask, let's have fun, and let's grow together. Okay, guys, and welcome to another episode of A Soul Grows in Israel. Today is another solo pod, and as much as I love interviews and vibing with people and having interesting conversations, I also really like just coming out here and discussing things that I find interesting directly to you guys, my amazing listeners. And again, spread the word if you like what you're hearing. So today's topic is Judaism and meditation, or meditation in ancient Judaism and today. Now, for all of you guys who think this is some woo-woo, only spiritual stuff, this pod might be a little academic, actually. And for those of you guys who want spirituality, I got you too. It's going to be like an all-inclusive, user-friendly, whether it's intro for you guys or you know what meditation is and you're familiar with it, at least we could bring it back to our roots and our source. So it's not you guys sitting on a mountaintop somewhere practicing Eastern meditation. This is deeply rooted in Judaism through oral tradition and later on through actually written texts. Okay, so I want to start with just the general health benefits and evidence about meditation on your health directly, physical and emotional health. So I saw this diagram, okay, and this is from Harvard Medical School, and they showed the amygdala, which is a part of the brain in the back that usually reacts with adrenaline to like fight or flight, anxiety, stress. You guys know what I'm talking about. And after 8 weeks of meditation, they started to realize that when they played a specific movie to the people in this trial test, the activation in that amygdala, in that part that reacted to anxiety, was dulled. In other words, when you watch, let's just say, a movie and you get stimulated and emotional, all normal, but also in regular life, when you're stimulated through conversations, whether it's insults, confrontation, the news, whatever it is, people who practice meditation, and even when they're not in meditation, in other words, if they're practicing it, let's just say every other day, maybe 5 minutes, right? What ends up happening is the brain starts to react to things differently when you're not in meditation. And I thought that was like so interesting. This isn't wishful thinking. These are MRIs, scans, doctors, scientists who are really trying to understand how to minimize people's stress in their lives. You know, so they've got therapy and medicine, but there are so many other ways, especially for people who don't respond well to the first two. What if there are ways that are way more ancient and are free and accessible to everyone? What if that could make the difference? Okay, so here's some of the physical effects that meditation can help with, okay? It can help you with sleep disturbances. It could help with headaches, migraines, muscle tension, weight changes, heart disease. I mean, it keeps going. Mood swings, depression, emotional stability, social withdrawal. People who do meditation report that they're able to deal with pain management better. They are able to sleep better. They deal with post-traumatic stress differently. It makes sense. You know, you're socially aware. You understand where you start and end, and you're able to take a minute. And when you're put in those situations or fight or flight, you're not as reactive because you somehow move into the role of what we call the observer instead of being captured. Okay. And that has a lot to do with your thoughts. Okay. So let me give you an example. Let's just say something's going down and someone's really going at you. And if you're not a confrontational person, it makes sense your adrenaline will spike, right? You feel attacked, right? It's like that saber-toothed tiger's coming at you and you have to run away or deal with it head on. So you're going to feel your heart rate speed up. You're going to feel yourself either running or confronting back, louder, angrier, defensiveness, you name it. What if, all right, and none of us are perfect Zen masters. I certainly am not a master in meditation. I should have started off the pod by saying that, but I have dabbled and I've realized that meditation includes a bunch of things. Okay, so if I'm in that situation and someone's coming at me, sometimes I might be able to observe it almost like from the outside. Now, I'm not talking about detaching myself completely, but I might be able to be like, they're coming at me. I feel my heart rate speeding up. This is normal. I'm not going to answer right now. You know, there's a sense of control that even though you're upset and you feel the body reacting, you're just the awareness of it. You're observing the things happening instead of being captured by all of it. And this helps not even when you're being confronted. Sometimes if people come over to you and they want a listener and you're able to be in the listening mode, the observer mode, to just hear everything they're saying without wondering, what am I going to eat for dinner? Right? What am I wearing? Do I have something in my teeth? Whatever your monkey mind is like throwing at you. But also, if you could be there and not think about what you're going to answer them. Okay. So a lot of us are always like a few steps ahead. What should I say to them? Will this be the right answer? Am I equipped to deal with this? And you're asking yourself questions. So the mind is running on hyperspeed. So you're not really listening totally. There's a part of you that's listening, but a part of you is checked out and worried about your response. What if you could listen to someone and just listen to them, see their face speaking at you, and really be receptive to what they're saying, even if it's uncomfortable, or even if you find it boring, or whatever's going on, or even if you're just concerned you're not good at this, to just be there. And I find that more important than your answer is this experience. It's the journey of you two guys being immersed in a conversation. And I would call that a type of meditation. I heard someone describe how the next thing they want to do that isn't fun, they're going to treat as a meditation. And this person told me it was taking out the garbage. Every time they take out the garbage for that day, they had a party. So it's a lot of times they would treat that as meditation. And that doesn't mean, again, they were sitting cross-legged, doing some sort of mantra. They just observed their hand grabbing the bag. They observed what it felt like to walk. They observed the path towards the garbage. It was just being in the moment, present. That's it. And what became normally what was normally kind of banal, is that the word? Banal? What was regular, just like this drudgery, became a practice. And that's maybe why monks mop for hours, right? They're treating their work or their ceremony as a place of presence and meditation. Okay. In Judaism, okay? What are the sources? Is it just some feel-good stuff? So the first thing you have to realize is Rashi says automatically the Jews are in Egypt, and Rashi comments that the people could not accept or feel any consolation from Moses' words. And he uses the word because of their kotzer ruach, their shortness of breath. And he goes on to say that when someone is under stress or duress, they become short of wind and breath, and they are unable to breathe deeply. When you're unable to breathe in and out deeply and calmly, you cannot receive what's being told to you. You cannot receive what the world around you is actually telling you. You're stuck in this place. And if you've ever seen anyone in a panic attack, it's exactly that. You could tell them that they're safe, but in reality, they have to be taken out of that trap, and they have to learn how to let go and breathe and breathe and breathe. And you might tell them, name 5 things that you see, name 3 things that you hear at the moment. And all of a sudden, they're put back into this world instead of being trapped in that place. And under extreme duress, like slavery, like the Jews in Egypt, you can understand how they were definitely kotzer ruach, shortness of breath. But that's not the first source we have. But I first have to make a distinction. I just told you all the benefits of meditation and how great it is for your mental health, your relationships, your physical health. But also, Rav Aryeh Kaplan, who is an amazing thinker, an American rabbi, prominent, and he was around in the early 20th century. He was around, he lived until 1983, so this is not very ancient. And he said that Jewish meditation is not just a form of relaxation or self-improvement, but it's a spiritual discipline. And that aligns the individual with the divine will, which means for you to understand really what divine will is, whatever Hashem, the Creator's will is, you need to sort of get to that higher place. Because if I'm trapped in myself and my thoughts and my desires, I can easily misconstrue and confuse what I think divine will is, and it'll be tainted with ego and my own rationalizations. But if I ever succeed, even for a moment, of separating myself from myself, and we'll get into that, right? The physical body and mind and thoughts with my truest self, which some people refer to as the soul, right? If I'm able to sort of connect to the divine will, now it's objective, and now I can trust it. And that's when my intuition begins to grow. My gut feeling that's always accurate, that isn't defensive, and that isn't, protecting me from some imaginary disaster, which is the fight or flight usually. Usually we don't come into contact with that kind of disaster, and nor should we, please God. So Rev Kaplan's basically saying how it's more than just let's chill and be present and have a nicer life. It's also a way more elevated way to be. Again, even if you touch it a few times a day, even if you touch it once in your life, that's going to be sort of this pinnacle, this sort of goal, this experience that you once had. what I really like about all this is that it's not just learning, it's experiential. So I can tell you, right, Hashem is one, but what if you got to experience it? What if you got to go to a place where I don't have to tell you everything's for the best? What if you started to feel everything is good right now? And don't forget, the word shalom doesn't just mean peace, but it means shalem, wholeness. When you're in a state of shalom, when you're in a state of actual peace, you're attached to the wholeness of everything, the whole universe, but also the perfection of everything. Everything at this moment is as it should be. If I could only change the following, and if I had X, Y, and Z, yeah, it's so amazing to want more, to hope for a better future. All of those things don't negate that this moment, right now, is the way it's supposed to be. Right now. In fact, right now just became a few minutes ago. So the whole thing is so hard to learn in this sort of classroom, academic sort of way. And that's why meditation allows you to internalize so many lessons that you might hear and think you understand. But once you experience it and go through it, it sort of surpasses words. And to me, that's like my favorite kind of learning. But we are here to learn the sources, I think. Also, if you stick around at the end, you could turn it off. But if you stick around at the end, maybe we can actually do a meditation. Okay, so let's open up the sources. Okay, first and foremost, had you guys ever wondered what Yeshivat Shem Ve'ever was? And for those of you who are not biblical scholars, my apologies, okay? So Yeshivat Shem Ve'ever was this place of study way before Abraham, the first patriarch, sort of marks Judaism, okay? This is a place that's post-flood, post-Mabul world, where Shem, who was Noah's son, and Ever, Noah's grandson, Shem's son, develop, you can imagine, maybe a monastery of learning or a place of deep meditation and study of divine knowledge about the universe and the world we live in. And Abraham, according to the oral tradition, does attend there. And he does become spiritually sensitive by learning there. And as we go on through the actual Bible, the Torah, you'll see that there are visits to this place by Rebecca. Rivka goes there to find out about her twins that she's pregnant with. Jacob, Yaakov goes there when he runs from his brother, and he stays there for a while, fortifying himself spiritually for the challenge that his life will bring. And you might say, one minute. I thought Abraham introduced monotheism, one God, godly knowledge into the world. The answer is maybe not. He definitely spread the study of one God and being thankful and wisdom and the inner secrets of the world to the world. But that stuff existed. Now, what did Abraham come to do? Well, there are many opinions. The opinion I've heard that resonates the most is that he taught how to unify the physical world with the spiritual world. Whereas Yeshivat Shem Ve'ever was more like what you would imagine monks to be like, where it was separate from the physical world. Asceticism, which is not Judaism. But you could understand that before the advent of Bnei Yisrael, there had to be some sort of passing down of oral knowledge that exceeds what they had then, especially after the flood, when they saw what does the world look like in the disaster of not having a spiritual study, you know, the havoc and the chaos that ensue. So we have this place, this secret sort of mystical place of learning that people had access to in those days. Now, as we keep going and we do learn more about Avraham, and we do learn more about Avraham, okay, well, we have the famous words, Lech Lecha, go for yourself, that's announced. And we learn in the oral tradition that God didn't necessarily speak to Abraham. God spoke to humanity, to mankind. And Abraham was spiritually sensitive enough to hear the voice, to hear the command, go for yourself. Go make a change. Leave your father's house. Leave this culture. No matter how popular it is, it's wrong. Go start again. Start a people. And every time he's in conversation with God, it alludes to the spiritual sensitivity that comes from silence, that comes from contemplation, and you can call it meditation. Or you could not, or just leave it. You know, again, I'm not teaching sort of halacha at this moment. I'm not saying, you know, you need to meditate and this is stuff you need to believe in. No, it'll enhance your life, maybe. But do you need it? Well, take it or leave it. But here's the tradition, and I love it. So do with it as you will. Going on, we have Yitzhak, Isaac. The words are that he went to Lasuach Basadeh. which, by the way, has this idea. Did he go to converse, lasuach, to have conversations? It has the root word also of like shrubbery, bushes, the fields, the forests. Did Isaac go out into nature to speak with the divine or to converse with nature? Either way, you could see it's alluding to this sort of meditative sort of state that I'm pretty sure, as far as I can understand, would lead to some sort of prophecy or conversations that exist in a different realm that is not common without that kind of work. Okay? What about the visions that Jacob sees? What about going to a mountain and seeing a ladder and angels ascend and descend? Was that like some sort of spiritual vision? Can you have spiritual visions nowadays? I don't know. But can we assume that when they do exist or when they did, there was like this dreamlike factor to it that probably, if you were like, I don't know, addicted to Instagram, you probably wouldn't have access to? In other words, there must be some sort of quiet and inner peace and work done to access that kind of realm. Okay, so we bring up the subject of prophecy, and I find this to be so interesting. And I got a lot of this info from Rav Aryeh Kaplan's book. Okay, so he speaks about the idea of schools of prophecy, specifically in the times of the prophets. It's written and referred to in Samuel 1, Shmuel Aleph, and he says how there was a place where people would go to learn how to keep to learn how to become prophets. And it wasn't the only goal, but that's what would happen when you went to these places and practiced the combinations of God's name, understanding cosmology, how the universe works, understanding numerology, like all these like really deep things. It would probably include music, because I know in the temple, the Levium did have music, and that was part of their meditation, the part of the prep before going into the Holy of Holies. This was stuff that was studied, and it was really rigorous. It was hard work. I've learned that it required abstaining from certain kinds of like food and activity when you were learning, and it was tough. It was really, really hard. By the way, the word Kabbalah means to receive. It doesn't mean mysticism. To be in a state of reception, to receive something, it requires a level of being okay. You know, some people call that joy. Some people call that inner peace. Like I said before, the shalem state. And that would happen with music and quiet and prayer and the spiritual work they would do in these schools of prophecy. And, you know, David HaMelech, King David, when he wrote Psalms, Tehillim, he spoke a lot about meditative themes like focusing on what God is, greatness, seeking that sort of guidance, contemplation. Our scripture is just sort of rife with these kinds of references. Now, it doesn't say the word meditation outrightly, but it seemed to be inferred and just commonly understood that there was quiet time for human beings, you know? But here's the interesting part. Where did prophecy go? What happened? And the Talmud Yoma goes into it and says the men of the great assembly, in Hebrew it's called the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. They got together and they were responsible for ending prophecy. So some people say, well, that's because they realized it wasn't necessary. And we had the advent of prayer and synagogues. And I was thinking, it wasn't necessary. Like, don't you guys wish that you could find out what was expected of you divinely? Like, can I speak to a prophet? In what year will this happen? And if I don't want to ask the future, at least can I say, am I in the right path? Did I handle that conflict correctly? Does God expect different of me, of our people? What's the solution? How do we bring this messianic era? And, you know, it wasn't necessary. I feel like it's necessary, or at least, like, I feel like it's lacking. I feel like, you know, I don't know. It feels like it might help us a bit, you know? So why would these people take prophecy away? And I found this to be enlightening. So Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan goes on to say, well, during this sort of exile, the first time we leave Israel, we have no more temple, and the schools of prophecy are not accessible to us. You know what other desire or energy was in the world then? They say idol worship, which is avodah zarah. In fact, those were parallels, you know, because every force has this positive, holy aspect and then sort of the dark side. Look at intimacy, physical intimacy, sexuality. It could be taken to the greatest heights to create humans, to create relationship with a spouse in the right way when you follow this halakha world. Or we know it could be, God forbid, rape, sex trafficking, treating people like pieces treating people like objects. Like you can see how the holiest of energies can be used in the most base way. Same thing with the energy of prophecy and spirituality. So if this one force, this one energy could be used towards prophecy or idol worship, guess what? Usually the dark side is way easier. You guys, it's much harder to wait till someone is married and be physically intimate within the confines of what we know are the Nida laws, going to the mikveh, observing at least, and even if you're not observing Torah, it's like being loyal and not having affairs and keeping to the principles that are decency. That's much harder than being messy and sloppy and doing whatever you want to at the moment. Yeah, it's harder in the long run, but we're talking about immediate gratification. And this is the same way it was with prophecy. So if you went to a school of prophecy, it might take you years until you reach that level. But if you decided, you know what, I want to feel things and I want to feel them now. Apparently, that sort of feeling that came with idol worship was this all-encompassing desire that was instantaneous, achieved with ease. The Anshe Knesset Hagdola understood that without a temple, without our schools of prophecy, without discipline, we as human beings would very much crave the spirit world, and we would just leave. We would just leave and we would be easy and we'd get into the world of idol worship. And they said, we're going to have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're going to have to get rid of idol worship. And with that, prophecy. That was a hard decision to make, I'm sure. And I know they debated also getting rid of intimacy. And then they said, well, no one would be born and we wouldn't have, eggs or humans, or it's a whole story. And when you realize what we sacrificed, which was the spiritual realm of understanding and wisdom and knowledge for the sake of keeping us away from really that dark side, we understand now, okay, we need something called the Siddur. We need formalized prayer. We need central synagogues. We need shuls. We need way more structure to sort of arouse this inner spirit, and it's going to be much harder. It's going to be much harder for us to feel spiritual. And again, spiritual doesn't mean that I'm dancing and jumping and my eyes are closed or I'm davening for 4 hours. Spirituality could mean that I feel like everything is okay at the moment. And even further than that, the person standing in front of me with all of their flaws, I got flaws too. Everything is as it should be right now. Same thing with current events. Yeah, they're doing the following, and if only they would do that. Everything is as it is and as it should be. It's almost like on the outside, I'm going to fight for truth and I'm going to make this world better. But on the inside, I'm completely at peace. When I say completely, I don't mean perfectly all the time. I mean moments, right? So if you have, 13, 14, 15 hours of waking time, what if 6 of those seconds, it's not a lot, everything is perfect at this moment right now? And I think when you go into a state of meditation, that's what you're touching. And to me, that's the greatest place of spirituality. And when I reach those places, I am kinder. I am a better friend. I'm a better spouse, parent, maybe podcaster. Like I'm present. I'm present and I'm not thinking about how do I look at the moment? How am I sounding? That's like self-possessed. And to void yourself of that, to be in a place of bitul, which means I'm void of my ego at the moment. Of course, I'm a better listener. Of course, I'm a better human. And no one expects us to be there all the time. But there's so much opportunity to access it just for those few moments. And then, of course, we have the traditions you might have heard of. Sefer Yetzirah means the book of creation. And it deals with lots of metaphysical structures of the universe, the divine names. We have the Zohar, that's Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. He wrote the Zohar. It's a book on Kabbalah, and it shows you that it's not just the intellect, but it's also about attaining higher spiritual realms. We have later on Rabbi Isaac Luria. People know him as the Ari HaKadosh, and he was in Sfat, and he spoke about meditation, prayer, and visualizations. And from there comes Chassidut. We have the Baal Shem Tov, who creates a whole new movement that talks about bringing meditation back. So a brief, tiny lesson in Jewish history, just so we understand why there was this idea of anti-Chassidut. We had, as we know, tons of disasters and pogroms and all sorts of things going on in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Arab world. You tell me when, and there was something going down, okay? And one of the really hard points was the Chmielnicki massacres, and people were villages burned, people's property stolen, rape, terrible, terrible time. And with that sort of depression came this hope. And you can look up more about Shabtai Tzvi, but he used Kabbalah to pass himself off as the Messiah, and people believed him. And at the end, he broke everyone's heart. He converts to Islam. And with that, people say, all right, done. Kabbalah, it's dangerous. It can be misused. The Eastern Europeans are scared of it and they tell everyone, that's it, done, finish. The Western Europeans decide it's a bunch of nonsense and hoopla and hocus pocus, forget it, done, be rid of it. So wherever you lived, it was on the DL. It was not being learned in public, and people who were practicing Kabbalah would do it like between 2 and 4 in the morning. Maybe there were reasons for those hours, or maybe they were literally hiding from their communities. And the Baal Shem Tov brings this sort of Kabbalah into a very user-friendly way to revive the souls that were turned off. So people were just going about their Judaism without warmth, without excitement. And especially if you were not like an intellectual, like a real Eloi, like a real Talmudic scholar, you didn't feel like you really had a point in your Judaism. You might have been, I don't know, a shoemaker, and you felt completely disassociated from Judaism. Comes the Baal Shem Tov and says, the simplest Jew has a soul. The most elevated Jew has a soul, and the soul is the soul. So if you're illiterate, you can reach the greatest heights. And he taught people how to be present and how to sing again. And it really revived so much. And Rav Aryeh Kaplan continues, and he says, earlier Kabbalah tried to bring man into heaven. Chassidut brings heaven into man. You don't need to understand everything, and you don't need to reject the physical pleasures in this world. The idea is to understand how to use them and to elevate them so that you and the world can bring heaven into man. And Chassidut has a term for it, and it's called Dira B'Tachtonim, which means a dwelling place for God in the lowest realm, which is where we live. And not only the lowest realm where we live, but the lowest realm of where we live. Like there is no place that's void of divine beauty and divinity. So then you end up not being afraid, not afraid of arguments, not afraid of people who think differently than you. You're just like, they have a place here too. Everything is filled with the presence of God. And there are like two terms you might have heard over the years, again, if you're immersed in the Jewish world. And those two terms are hitbonenut and hitbodedut. Two different things, same common denominator. So hitbonenut is, as far as I know, it was started with the Chabad Hasidim. It's a sect called Chabad. And most famously known, you had the Baal HaTanya and also the Lubavitcher Rebbe, et cetera, et cetera. And hitbonenut comes from the root word called bina. And the idea was a deep understanding. So what happened is you might be grappling with a concept or an idea, and it's either murky to you or you want to understand it in a deeper way. It would be the ability to turn off all your other thoughts and preoccupations and go into a place of silence and then contemplate this idea to its depth. And that would require a lot of mental discipline. And I'll say even further, Chabad is a very intellectually rigorous practice and study. Then we have Hitbodedut, which is another Hasidic leader, Rabbi Nachman, and he was actually a descendant of the Baal Shem Tov. And Hitbodedut comes from the word boded, which means to be secluded, to be alone. And he would encourage people to go to places of nature, rivers, waterfalls, greenery, hills, mountains, forests, and talk to God like he was your best friend. And sometimes it would be crying, sometimes it would be anger, sometimes it would be numb, sometimes you'd be happy, but to just feel your heart and mind being totally encompassed by the presence of God wherever you were. And it's not just Hasidim, by the way. We can go to the Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, and that is the Mesilat Yesharim. And he says, and this is a quote, the greatest part of the service of God is found in silence. When a person restrains his thoughts, words and actions, for the soul becomes cluttered by all these things. For the soul to have a microphone, okay, for the soul to be able to be audible and heard, the other noise, which is so much louder, and again, it's always the easier thing, that's maybe a bit darker. It's hard work to clear out that clutter, but if you learn how to access what the soul is thinking at that moment, if you're able to access the soul's voice at the moment, you start to realize that everything you're looking at has this sort of positive sheen to it. And I don't know how else to explain it other than to maybe experience it. And again, like I said, it's not just Chassidut and Kabbalists. We have Rav Dessler. He was alive till 1953, and he spoke about the concept of cultivating your inner life. And he said to develop a stronger inner life, a person must work to detach from the noise of the world. And he spoke about turning inward. He said there's the mabat chitzoni, the outer way to look at the world, the news of the day, my tree needs trimming, what am I making for dinner? Those things are essential and part of life. But then he said there's also the mabat pnimi, the inward self, the inner perception of things. What's going on inside of me? How do I understand my true self and who is my true self? And how do I align that with the ultimate higher truths that exist? And he said that true spirituality emerges when a person begins to act from their nefesh, which is their soul. And the only way to do that is to cultivate silence, because only through a quiet and reflective mind can one access the deeper layers of their soul. And again, it sounds like, so, okay, what is the soul, right? You can't put everything into words. It's like words almost cheapen things sometimes. Sometimes you need that as the way to communicate and understand things. But what if we were able to access it with that inner self, a place that goes above thought and words? And we've all experienced these moments, you guys. If, you might point to your wedding or the birth of a child or a beautiful lesson, a piece of music. Shabbat is like a great example. If you observe it, and if you observe it in the way I think it was meant to be observed, you enter a realm of quiet. You're not creating anything anymore. You're not creating a better world. You're just at peace. It's a release of something so that you can receive, again, l'kabel, Kabbalah, you can receive what does peace on earth feel like? Some people experience that when they go to graves and they engage in prayer. Some people experience this on Yom Kippur. Some people experience this in a dreamlike place. However and wherever, I don't think that there are rules because people are so personalized and live through life so differently. But if you have experienced the feeling of things are okay right now, or I'm in a place of acceptance, not forced acceptance, just I understand that there's a divine will I don't understand, all of that stuff speak to surrendering. And to me, to surrender is to enter a realm of a higher spiritual truth, because that is true. What can you really control here except for maybe your reactions, So when you accept a higher truth, you've left the egoic state of mind and you've entered, I think, a realm of being spiritually aligned. And it's quite a sweet moment. It feels real good. It's that shalom we were referring to. If you've heard of Rav Shachter Shalomi, he spoke about Chassidut, Kabbalah, and he actually incorporated Eastern spiritual practices too, like mindfulness and breathing techniques and contemplative prayer. If it doesn't involve idol worship, like by all means, like figure out what works for you. I know that if I go into a meditative state, if I'm actually doing meditation, I have a much easier time doing it if there's like a breeze. I find it much easier if I just did yoga because the physical activity makes my mind relax a bit more. And I've been told that yoga was actually invented so people could sit in deeper meditation. I don't know if that's true, but it works for me. And I'd like to be a better listener. And I want to be a better parent, friend, daughter, wife, teacher, you name it. And if this stuff can enhance that and it goes together. If I can lower my blood pressure and sleep better, of course I'm a better listener, If I could be more present in places of confrontation and conversations, like of course I'm better in that role, and maybe people will want to be around that sort of energy, and I'm passing around light and goodness. And of course then I'm aligned with this deeper divine will, which is relaxed, which is on the receptive side, the Shema Yisrael. The Shema Yisrael is me declaring something. And Rav Jonathan Sachs says when you go to the next paragraph called Vahaya in the prayer service, then you become a listener. So it's this constant conversation with this divine will of what is expected of me and what am I ready to do. It's a lot of reevaluation and a lot of understanding things in a deeper way. You start to realize, wait, maybe it's not talking about reward and punishment. Maybe it's talking about the world and consequences, how we collectively should be living, what's the priority, all these deep knowledges. I always say, we're looking for so much inspiration out there, but what if there's a part of us that knows everything? What if there's a part of us, and I don't mean like ego, like I know everything. I mean, what if there's a part of us that every time you hear something that resonates with you, it's because you're uncovering something you always knew to be true. And what if when you resist something, it's not because you're being defensive. It's because you shut off that cluttering noise, the defensiveness, the trauma. And if you were able to sort of lower that volume, what if the intuition comes up and when you hear something and you're defensive, it's because it's sheker. It becomes much clearer. Life becomes a bit less confusing. And I like that. What if you were less reactive to politics, you know? And if, I don't know, you open the newspaper and you saw, I don't know, the left, whatever you're reading about that's aggravating you, and you were like, well, I'm capable of independent thought. Not everything the media is feeding me is completely either accurate or proportional. What if people on the street generally are normal and good? And I don't have to believe everything I consume because I have an inner voice that's telling me what's accurate and what's not. Yeah, that's possible. Why am I focusing on that part? What if I focused on the other things that are going on in the world? What if I only read the news once a week because no one's the boss of me? Because my soul is strong. You know, you start thinking for yourself and you're less easily controlled, number one. But number two, you're not a zombie and you're not reactive to whatever the universe is feeding you. You're actually choosing what to focus on. You're really in the conductor's chair. You're really in the driver's seat. I love that idea. And the light of God is everywhere. But just like the unconscious beating of your heart and the unnoticed inflation of your lungs up and down, we don't really pay attention to all the stuff that's going on. And I think meditation tunes you into that divine light and you become aware of all the things going around you and the radiance in the world at large. So, as promised, if you're driving, by the way, you could press pause on the pod and come back to this because I thought maybe we could do a short meditation and just a sort of experience. And when I say short, I mean like 5 minutes, like a short meditation so we can experience what this might be like. So if you did pause it, unpause. And if you're home and you could just find a comfortable place. And by the way, if this isn't for you, just listen, see what happens. There's no right or wrong way to get into this, just like there's no right or wrong way to be spiritual, right? It's such a personalized thing. So and let me just add, if you want spirituality that's not religiously infused, there's so much out there. There's Sam Harris, who, by the way, might lean towards Buddhism anyway. Alan Watts. There's so much neutral meditative work that's neurological. I I like everything. I like everything again that's void of that idol worship avodah zarah energy, because who needs that? Okay, so when you're ready, you can close your eyes or you can keep them open. Again, no rules. And just notice your breath. Notice if you're wondering, am I doing this right? So you're just noticing your thoughts. Notice if you're thinking, why am I doing this? And also accept that as a thought. We're not turning our thoughts off. We're just observing them. And when you observe them and you're aware of them, you might remove the negative charge or judgment that goes along with it. And as you breathe out, feel your feet or your body sinking into the earth. And as you breathe in, you can feel your head floating upward. You could feel the chest expand as you breathe in. You can feel everything deflate as you breathe out, almost like the navel can touch the inside of your back. So as you keep your eyes closed, just know there are so many forms of meditation. People practice the divine name, different lights, colors, energies around the head. But we could leave all of that alone and just focus on everything being exactly as it should be right now. So, whatever divine will orchestrated you to be listening to my voice right now, surrender to that force. And if you're wondering, when is this over? What will I eat next? Again, just surrender to that. There's nothing wrong with the mind doing what the mind was meant to do. We're just learning that we're not the mind. We're not our thoughts. We can always just observe them with neutrality, with compassion, and surrender. And as you surrender to the moment, you can turn the volume off and just be quiet. Or you can continue with us and know that in the surrender, you're not just surrendering to the moment, but the divine will is filled with love. You are loved not because you accomplished anything specific and not because you're meditating. You're a receptor of love and a giver of love because you possess a soul. And Hashem decided that you needed to be here, born in this generation, to that family, with that personality and that journey. And it's divinely precise and orchestrated to bring you to this moment, and to this moment, and to the next moment. It's free, it's accessible, and every soul is worth the time and effort to quiet down everything it doesn't need. And if your eyes are closed, just keep them closed and let your breath get a drop deeper. And if they're open, just notice what that looks like. And you can wiggle your fingertips or your toes. You can move your head left and right to reintegrate the body. And before you open your eyes, just know you're going to be rushed with a bunch of visual stimulation. And notice how that feels as you slowly flutter open the eyes a few times. Coming back to this everyday life, but bringing a piece of your inner self, your mabat pnimi, with you, and maybe to someone you meet today, or maybe to, again, an activity that feels boring, routine, or even not desirable, and infuse it with a sense of importance and holiness. Because every moment and every step we take on this earth really is a gift and an opportunity to bring more light in. So I want to thank you for being with me on this journey today. It went deep, and I hope it wasn't, and I hope you enjoyed it. And again, leave me a comment. You could follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts, and join the conversation. I'd love to hear how this was for you, what you liked and what you didn't like. So enjoy, guys, and thanks again.